Live your life, boy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your host of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
Yeah, rear naked choke of Cocker Spaniel, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Bro.
Change the neighborhood up.
Conspiracy Farm. Go. Check it out.
All right, guys, here we go off to the races once again. Always good to be back at the farm. Jeffrey Wilson riding shotgun with UFC Hall of Famer, Eater of Worlds, Patrick J. Miletich, with a very interesting guest today, man. I'm really stoked to hear about all this. You were so psyched when we talked about it. Take her away, champ.
I'd love to, Jeffrey. And I got to tell you, I've had several conversations with our guest, and each time that I speak with him, my ears are, well, bubbling over with gray matter pouring out of them and a little bit of smoke as well. Super stoked to interview our guest, Jozeph Johnson, who is many things: agriculture expert, water expert, restructuring of water molecular structures, to capture light, to capture energy. He's going to get into these things using quantum physics that most people just simply have never even comprehended, let alone experienced any of this stuff. And he's been the CEO of 2 biotech companies. He's an expert in dramatically increasing efficiency of organics, combined with, of course, a better level of water for soil reclamation and larger yields for agriculture and many other things. So, Jozeph Johnson, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. I've spent most of my, career, a lab or out in the field running testing, and I've done very little, public speaking in relation to this, mainly because I haven't felt that I really truly I felt like there was more. I still had more questions than I had answers about things, and I wasn't sure I could really add anything useful to the conversation except for more confusion. I
think the main thing is, start by explaining, the process of which you've been through to unwind the water secrets and what you found and what you've created, number one, with that, and some of your history, of course, in agriculture as well.
So I'll talk about how I got into this, because it is very interesting, and it's really juxtaposed to what a lot of people, generally believe about it. So I first started studying water structure as a side effect of a customer of mine introducing me to what he called a water structuring unit, and he described it to me, and I'm like, well, that's just impossible. There's nothing real about that. That's complete junk science, pseudoscience, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, would you be willing to test a device for me? I said, yeah, sure, send it over. So my factory and my laboratory was on about a 40-acre strawberry farm in Oxnard, California. And they sent me the device, and I looked at it, and I'm like, there's no way this thing does anything at all. But I'm like, okay, I'll be fair. I'll give it a test. The thing that confused me about the situation is normally con artists, they'll ask for your money before they send you anything, if they send you anything, right? So I'm like, they got this con wrong. So since they paid for the shipping and sent me the unit, I decided to go ahead and give it a fair shake. And the initial test that I did was simply pouring water through the device and putting a test and control. I had some bean sprouts, and there were some beans, so I decided to make bean sprouts. And what was curious about it was that the beans that I tested with the structured water, they actually developed much more robust root systems, and the germination rate was increased. And so I was sitting there scratching my head going, well, I'm not sure I want to go and take this out to any of the farms of the people that I know that are generally very conservative and test this, because, they'll probably look at me and laugh if I say anything about it. So I asked my friend Steve, I'm like, hey, do you mind if I just test this on like the small plot of strawberries? He's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. So I put it out there, and to my surprise, it was like 24 hours. We had there's this measurement that we take when it comes to assessing the quality of food. It's a Brix reading. It's where we crush out the plasma or the liquid in the vasculature of the plant take a measurement of the sugar and the combination of sugars or minerals that are in the plasma, and we use that as a metric to determine the quality of food, amount of nutritional value, and or kind of guess the amount of energy that there is you would get from consuming that tissue. And we got a 25% increase in the berries in 24 hours, which is incredibly unusual. The thing is, for strawberries specifically, to increase the Brix and the sweetness, when I tasted the berries, they were incredibly sweet. To increase that number, you have to get more calcium in. And this is a problem specifically in Southern California, where we have clay soils and very salty clay soils. And strawberries are generally not very tolerant to salt, and calcium is poorly mobile in clay soils. It tends to grab and hold the clay, be held tightly by the clay. And calcium being a very large molecule, atom, large valence shell, in comparison to some of the other things, it can be very difficult to get into the tissues. So the readings that I was getting was suggesting we had a dramatic increase in an element that we oftentimes had a lot of trouble getting into the plant. So I was kind of shocked. And, I called up and I told the people the results that I got, preliminary results. And they're like, oh, can we come out and, do a video of you and have you talk about it? I'm like, I guess I don't know what to say about it much, but I can see this result and it's consistent across, fairly large field. So these people came out that were from the company, were salesmen for the company that made it. Now, the company that made it didn't have, the salesmen were complaining to me that nobody had ever done any scientific testing on the devices, and they didn't have any evidence. They was all like pseudoscience, was all like sold through spirituality and this and that and the other thing. And they wanted some test data. And so they were shocked when I actually did a test and got a result, because I was the first person that had ever been able to do that, apparently, despite these devices being sold for many years. And so I was still confused about the device and the fact that it worked at all. And they came out and did an interview with me, and I'm like, I really don't know what to say. The only time I normally see this sort of thing is, after a rain, we'll get this sort of response of an increased growth rate and increased sugars and Brix and so on and so forth. And that got me thinking about exactly what is the difference between rainwater and regular, and city water. I've put distilled water on plants, and that doesn't seem to increase their growth. It's done well water, that doesn't increase their growth. But there's something about rainwater that nobody can deny has a dramatic effect on the growth rate of plants. And I don't really see any explanation for that in any chemistry or physics books. I've seen different explanations, and all of them, I've thought through them or, evaluated them, and they're junk, so that they don't pencil out. They maybe sound good at the first hearing, but when you start trying to do math on it, it doesn't make any sense. So that was really the beginning of my curiosity in relation to this, and I was started looking into it, because I'm like, this is really a significant thing that we haven't really nailed down or defined, and it seems to be responsible for a huge difference in the way that plants grow, rainwater versus regular water.
Joseph,
if I can synthesize rainmaker water, we could have something very useful.
If I can ask you real quick, I'm sorry, Joseph, have you heard of like certain municipalities frowning on and citing people for collecting rainwater?
I have. And I was looking into that. Normally what it is it's, at least in California, there's this company called the Wonderful Company, and it's ran by a very politically well-connected individual. And, it seems that there are wealthy and powerful people that have bought into or basically worked to privatize our water sources. And those people want everybody on a municipal system that they supply, right? So it's a municipal supply, but it is a private company that owns the water and supplies it to the municipality, generally. In a lot of these places, that's the direction it's going.
So do you think that's why they're pushing it towards that, because they would just want you on their system, as opposed to a certain understanding of what you're talking about, that rainwater does this exponential growth of certain plant life?
I'm not sure that I can know enough to speak about all municipalities and all systems of government or all the different deals that different businesses have made with. I can't really say that. I don't know. I think there's different reasons for doing things, but I think this is something can be boiled down to just plain simple human greed, where you have, I mean, if you look at the way our government is here in the United States right now, we have corporations writing these huge long bills that they hand to the people they paid to run for office to sign before they've even read.
Right.
So we know that it's private corporations that are generally writing all the bills and putting the money and time into generating, all the laws that are being entered onto the books by the politicians that they hired to run in the first place.
Yeah.
That seems to be the mechanism of operation. And I don't really see there to be a profit in at least the people that are running like water systems. I don't think that there's no profit they would have in inhibiting the health of the population. They aren't like a medical company. So I can't really draw a line to profit for that. And generally, I do believe that corporations in America operate for the purpose and reason of profit. It does seem to be the case. So if there isn't a profit interest in it, it's hard for me to define a motive, and thus creating the idea why that would be happening that way. I do know there are some people that are psychopaths and whatever, that maybe they have control of different areas, and that's what 2% of the population are sociopaths. So maybe in some places, but I don't think it's ubiquitous.
One of the reasons I ask is we often make that correlation between that revolving door between ingesting poison, which is our food supply, and then the pharmaceutical companies. So if something like what you're saying, rainwater being able to grow more nutritious, bigger, more fruitful plants, and them wanting to frown upon collecting rainwater, it's all kind of circumstantial. There's
this is the thing though. It doesn't seem that you can store rainwater and it will have the same effect as it has when it first falls from the sky. This is that's one of the things about it. If that were the case, all water on the surface is rainwater. So why is it different if it rains somewhere else over here than went through a canal and then I pump it through with a pump into my field? Why does that not work as well? So that's kind of the question. That's the curiosity, right? So
no, without a doubt. And I honestly don't mean to cut you off. It's kind of like a stream of consciousness right now as I'm thinking about it, because G. Edward Griffin made a documentary called "What in the World Are They Spraying?" And it's interesting for you to say, or not to say you're wrong, but to hear you say that there's so much benefit to rainwater falling on certain plants and the molecular transformation, I guess, that happens, and then seeing like in this documentary what the stuff they're spraying in the sky is, what it's doing to trees, plants, foliage, plant life, etc. It's interesting, very interesting.
Well, I'm not to discount. I can't speak to as to what they're spraying. I mean, people say I've been watching what they call. I used to live in Sedona, Arizona, and I've been watching these chemtrails for years, and people have tried to say they're contrails, except for when I've tried to match the temperature and the humidity at the altitude the planes are flying with the idea that they're contrails that are forming, it doesn't make sense, because they're there sometimes and not there other times. Right. So it's pretty obvious that it's some sort of a program. And if you look into the patent office, there are patents that describe mechanisms for geoengineering that pretty much describe what we see happening in the air. Yes. So calling it a conspiracy theory is kind of stupid at this point. It's not a theory when you have a patent on it. It's like... Well,
and it's even in government legislation. I think Pat, one of our friends, entered legislation into the Illinois legislature about it, and it's in UN document. It's in all kind of government documents for sure. Like you said, to call it a theory at this point is,
Well, have you heard that? I heard a joke recently I thought was absolutely brilliant. They said, what the difference is between a conspiracy theory and reality? Nowadays, about 6 months, 3 months.
Seriously.
And it's just, I have seen, a huge change in, I guess, the way our political leaders and the heads of many establishments have been behaving. I saw it while I was working, the last 15 years in agriculture, just the marriage between the large companies and the enforcement arms of our government, and that revolving door. And I got to see firsthand exactly how corrupt our system is, at least with fertilizers. especially when you start talking about organics. Now, the interesting thing is I actually refuse to have any of my products registered as certified organic because for a variety of reasons, but basically it came down to a principle, and it's that the people that determined or wrote the standards for the organic agriculture are the same people selling us chemical fertilizers.
Yes.
And the chemical model for agriculture is no different if they're the same elements, right? The difference is in the balance of it and how you understand it.
Yeah.
So the model that I was championing and working on was basically based off of millions of years ago. There were plants grew 5 times as big as they do now, and there were no fertilizer companies. So how does that work? I would rather have plants growing 5 times as big as they do now and not have to buy fertilizer. My reasoning for getting involved in fertilizer was multifaceted, but primarily one of my goals that I had was literally to destroy the fertilizer industry because I realized it had to be a fraud. There's no way it could not be. The fossil record across the entire planet says so.
Well, and that ag business, as Pat, we've talked about it many times on the show, that, it's all organized crime in my humble opinion, and the agricultural business is absolutely no exception. Because again, it's not to get too deep into it as we've talked about, but it starts with the soil. You can certify stuff organic as much as you want, but if you're treating your soil with with petrochemicals, etc., you're not pumping out anything.
I don't have a problem with petrochemical fertilizers. I don't have a problem with the elements or the atoms themselves. There's nothing wrong with them. The issue is the balances that they're put in. And a misunderstanding, our entire model of agriculture is based off of, have you ever heard of von Liebig?
I haven't.
He's a French chemist that created the model for basically the ion exchange mechanism, the current model of agriculture. And he recanted his PhD thesis where he actually put this model forward about 5 years after he wrote it. He realized he was wrong. And we should realize, in fact, if you actually go and dig into the studies that have been done, there's evidence in every single major university. They have a record of the application, our current model of application of fertilizers, causing a significant and continual decline in soil fertility year upon year upon year upon year. This is a fact, and everybody knows it. But this is the thing. The less fertile the soil becomes, the more fertilizer you have to put it into to grow a crop. Thus, this is a very profitable model. And this is the sole reason this model has continued and been pushed to science for the last 100 years. It was absolutely recanted and rebutted perfectly by the scientist that invented it, much like the mRNA vaccine, if you want to look into that, but it's not a vaccine. But this is interesting when we want to get back to the topic of water.
Sure.
One thing that I noticed is I do soil consultations. So whenever I would work with a farmer to help them improve their yield, we'd do a soil test. And it didn't take me very long to figure out the soil tests we were getting when we would apply the fertilizer program appropriate to it and then test the soil afterwards. That the balances did not, you'd think that you put in, X amount of pounds of figs, X amount of pounds of potatoes, and X amount of pounds of oranges into the back of a truck, and that you would increase those volumes and the values that you would find after you transported that truck to its destination to be increased by the amount you added into it. But if we were going to apply that analogy to soil and nutrients being put in, it never behaves that way. In fact, it seemed that every time we would add some corrective element into the ground, it would induce a secondary or tertiary deficiency down the road. And this was baffling to me. The other thing that really got me was if I decided after a while to start to try something. So I'd take, instead of one sample, I would take 3. And I would send those 3 samples to the 3 most reputable laboratories and see what they came back with. And I never got the same test result back. They were all different, significantly so. And I'm like, well, that's very interesting. If our testing method for determining nutrient deficiency in soil is always going to show that things are off or is going to give us a random result back, that will mean that every time you do a soil test, you'll have to apply something, right? but it never seemed to actually correct the problem. Now, to some extent, we figured out some smart guys, some really ingenious individuals decided to start doing tissue analysis of plants, and instead of applying what they saw missing in the soil, foliarly apply corrective nutrients. Now, this makes it incredibly efficient because you go from needing hundreds of pounds or tens of pounds to needing a pound or an ounce for an entire acre. It's incredibly efficient. And this seems to actually have resulted in people that have applied these techniques getting a much better productivity out of their plants. And it's really interesting because one of the other studies that I had looked at was there's this guy named Redfield. He got a Nobel Prize in 1933. And what he did was he went and took tens upon tens of thousands of samples of soil and water all over the planet. And what he found was that regardless of where he tested, the chemistry for life itself, regardless of what the chemistry of the environment was always the same. And that's really interesting because because I go and we try and grow this crop or that crop, and we say, well, we have to change the basis of the chemistry of the soil to get this crop or that crop of what's soluble out of the ground. And Redfield said, well, no, really the chemistry and all the things are the same. The base chemistry for life, it's the same. And that would suggest that we should only have one fertilizer balance that would be ideal to apply to the ground to induce, well, the growth of life, right? So that was fascinating to me. But getting back to water, we have to say, if that's the case, then how is it that all these different parent materials or base chemistries that we have in the soil, literally from that base chemistry, this has a huge variation between 38,000 different soil types in the United States alone. How are we getting this? How in all of those environments is the same chemistry moving into solution in the water and then creating life? The only answer I could find to that would be that the structure of the water in all of those different environments was either A, a different structure of water, or B, that water itself had some sort of intelligence that allowed it to selectively extract the chemistry of life from a variety of different, regardless of what the base chemistry of the solution of the parent material of the soil or environment was. And that really screwed my brain up.
Yeah, please, if you don't mind, say that again. Say that again.
Okay, so let's take it. I'll try and say it this way. We have 38,000 different balances of chemistry in our ground in the United States soil alone, according to the latest geological survey, which we spent the U.S. government spent a significant amount of money doing a fairly good job evaluating. So if we have all these different chemistries that are in the soil everywhere, but we know also from the Nobel Prize winner Redfield that the chemistry for life, a living ecosystem, is exactly the same, then how is it that water is able to extract from all these different environments selectively the balance of the chemistry of life? Right. So you could say that here's a base material of soil. Then we have all the living tissue. If we separate those two out, and then we know that water is the medium of exchange that basically collects or dissolves all those nutrients, picks them up and puts them into cells, and then makes more cells. What that would mean is that water has this ability to selectively extract from varying balances the perfect balance of the chemistry of life and generate life from it. So that would mean either A, that in water in all these situations is different, has a different structure, or B, that water has an intelligence and is able to selectively dissolve just the things that are specific to the chemistry of life in the correct balances from all of these different environments.
And I don't want to use a too whatever over intellectualized term here, but does that connote in any way that the water is like sentient?
Well, I mean, I guess it would be dependent on what we would call sentience.
I mean, for it, it's like to choosing which. I don't know.
I would say it's more over a conduit for sentience.
Wow.
water is known as a universal solvent, and it effectively acts as a medium of exchange for electrical current. And if we were going to call consciousness, say what's the difference between a living being, and a dead being, it would be the electrical charge that is running through their system and operating or initiating all of that, initiating effectively cellular respiration, or the initiating current for the Krebs cycle for respiration. So consciousness itself, if we were going to define it, at least I would say, is the current, the operating, electrical current, and whatever component or intelligent system that's able to regulate the systems of the bodies, or the organelles of the body, all the different, regulate all the interplay between all those different organs' functions. And
which makes sense, because our planet is so much water, and we're made up of 90+% water. It's very interesting to kind of think that water has, this kind of power. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you again, because I'm just, have you?
No, we were having a discussion.
Yes, an exchange of ideas. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Joseph. I don't want to get into pseudoscience, but I found this very fascinating. Maybe you can help talk me off the ledge about this. But there was a doctor, Dr. Masaru Emoto. Have you heard of him, the Japanese scientist?
Yes, of course, yes.
Okay. Is that nonsense? I'm going to read this real fast, just so people who don't know who Dr. Masaru was. His work is documented in the New York Times, bestseller, The Hidden Messages in Water. He demonstrates how water and exposed to loving, benevolent, and compassionate human intention results in aesthetically pleasing physical molecular formations in the water, while water exposed to fearful and discordant human intentions resulted in disconnected and disfigured and unpleasant physical molecular formations. Is that nonsense, or is there something to that? Because then it gets into the environment, like you said. It's anyway. Go ahead.
No, it's not. It's not necessarily nonsense at all. If you're going to say, and we'll go back to your terms, discordant perspective. Now, if you were going to look at that as frequency or sound frequency, if you have sound frequencies or notes that are played together that have a beneficial interaction with each other, then it literally creates beautiful patterns in salts laid on a sheet of slate. Now, interestingly, the patterns that are created that are consistent, they would be Platonic solids, right? The stable standing waves that are generated between a beneficial interaction between two frequencies creates patterns that we would refer to as beautiful, or that do associate with the Platonic solids. And if you go back to the Platonic solids and you want to go start looking at the positions of electrons, or the number of electrons on the outside of elements, though, there's a ton of all the different elements have a wide variety of different number of electrons, but it's only the elements, the electrons that are on the outer shell that interact with anything else. And this is what determines effectively the limitation. It's what determines the structure of all of the different compounds that there are in nature. And so in that sense, what you would call, some people refer to as sacred geometry, which is oftentimes referred to as pseudoscience, which is an absurd obfuscation of fact, and I'll get to that in a second. Is actually the pseudoscience that they call sacred geometry is the basis of all chemistry. It's mathematically sound. It explains the interaction between different, it gives a definition for the base of all structural formations, which includes life, DNA, crystalline structure. And all those chemical reactions are based off of, can be understood through understanding the Platonic solids. Now, getting to that, there was only 2 books that were available for anybody to read. And one of the books that was essential for everyone to read was by Euclid. It was called The Elements. Now, the reason why that is so absolutely essential, I think, for the education of a population, and it used to be considered essential to become considered to be educated, is this. Our modern schooling system teaches people memorization. The Elements, by Euclid, teaches people deduction. And through the principles set down in the Elements, all mathematics was born. All science.
Euclid, of course, was the Greek mathematician, father of geometry, was he not? Just so people know, just
Yeah,
qualify the
calling him
terms.
a mathematician I would say is incorrect. But well, I mean, it depends on how you define it. But the way people understand math now, where we have numbers had absolutely nothing to do with it. Numbers are effectively idols. They are fictions. The line means nothing of a 1. The 2 is not represent 2. The 3, or there are some people that have explained how it represents. 1 represents everything. But again, this is a representative. They have a representative function or power, meaning that they are not actually the thing we're talking about. We're using them to describe the thing.
Right.
Now, the elements actually explains how we created numbers from the principles set down in the elements. And the principles set down in the elements created all the sacred geometry. It's what created our ability to the understanding was necessary for Moseley, for instance, to be able to use X-rays to initially image the proton at the center of the nucleus of an atom and create our model for the standard table of the elements. It is that ability that is transferred, or basically begins with the understanding set down in the elements, that we created all of our sciences from. And it's something that's not taught. We're taught memorization rather than the principles that you need to understand to infer truth from fact. And that is the thing, is we have the society with the most amount of information and yet zero understanding of how anything works. And that is, in it's of itself, a remarkable achievement, in my opinion. But I'm not sure it's something that is you could also describe as a desirable achievement. Not from my perspective of how I would like to see the world be, but maybe it's useful for some people. So the thing is, there are sacred geometry and numerology have been described as pseudosciences primarily by I think as an effect of the fact that people have been using them. They were adopted by people to do tarot readings or other people that do use these mechanisms to con other people out of their money. But there is a reasoning for it. There is actually a scientific aspect to this, but you have to know how to apply it correctly. Now, when it comes to Dr. Emoto, if you take a comb and you run it through your hair, create a static charge, and put it next to water, you know what happens?
I don't have any hair, so
it pushes it away. Now, so a static field is what is known as it's a static electrical field. It's what is known as a dielectric field, and a dielectric field repels magnetic or paramagnetic fields, which oxygen is a paramagnetic element. You can use a magnet to attract it. So if you're saying the frequency, you have this cellular frequency of every cell that is in your body. Again, there's a current coming from your brain going down to those cells that is initiating the combustion, right? That's happening and causing all those cells to fire. That is an electromagnetic current. And an electromagnetic current, when it flows through, it generates a field, and that field will affect water. So I have another concept for you that you may not have thought of or considered. The heart is not a pump. And I was shocked when I got to Stanford and I realized that none of the heart doctors had any idea that was the case. And the reason why I know this is I've worked in agriculture, and I know the kind of power that is necessary to pump a liquid through a pipe, and how that gets exponentially greater the smaller the pipe gets. So when you look at the velocity that blood has to travel through the body to be able to maintain a supply of nutrients and oxygen to the cells for continuous combustion, respiration, removal of waste, it's impossible to accomplish using a pressure pump. No way. Not possible. So then we have to go, well, then how is the circulation of blood in the body happening?
The lungs?
If it's not a pump. It's not. It's a valve. Heart's a valve. It opens and closes based upon pressures that are generated in the vascular system in the tissues. So let me explain. one of the mechanisms that you may be familiar with that they use to evaluate the function of the heart is called an electrocardiogram, right? Where they're actually measuring these charges that are generated by the body that really cause the heart to contract and expand. So it is literally the current that's causing the heart to contract or expand. But there's another thing about the body and the blood. The blood is hemoglobin. So it has this heme molecule, iron. Iron is a magnetic material, but it can, depending on what its oxidation state, it will either be attracted to or repelled by a field, electromagnetic field or current, depending on the polarity of that field, which means basically which way it's spinning and going. So when you look at the heart and you go, well, the heart's not pumping. What's happening is there's a current being generated that goes through these systems that literally propels the blood, much in the way say a rail gun you're familiar with, where they have this iron object and they generate these between these two rails, these two opposite currents, and the electromotive force that is generated from that flow of current propels that iron object out. That is more akin to the way that the blood circulates through the body. It's actually pressure that's generated over the whole of the vascular system in a polar manner that pushes or propels, puts small amounts of force on the whole of the blood in solution, and the whole of the blood in your body in a specific direction based upon its polarity. And that's how it can separate oxygenated blood from deoxygenated blood and tell it which vascular system, where to go. That's how it works. As far as I can understand, that's my best estimation. No reasonable conclusion or explanation of how blood is pumped through the body, from what I can tell, has ever been actually proposed by modern science.
Well, that's very fascinating, because I have a loved one who's, a lot of people, iron deficient, and there's, this particular person kind of been passing out, and
they're actually manganese deficient, not iron deficient.
Is that what it? Okay.
There's a reason for that. Like I was talking about analytical chemistry and some of the issues with it, and I don't know. I know so many people that have been diagnosed with iron deficiency, and they take iron pills, take iron, and yet for some reason they can't build the levels up in their blood. And you go, well, what's the issue? Well, the thing is there's a mechanism by which iron is brought, moves into the blood. So you have to look at moreover the mechanisms that generate blood in the body and supply iron. And iron is regulated by manganese. So manganese is critically deficient in our soils as a side effect of the application of Roundup. The Roundup, one of the things that I noticed was when we would be testing basically we did the test on germination rate to determine the quality of the crop. And we were down to about 60, generally it's around 62% is what it runs in the Midwest for like seed wheat and corn and whatnot. And when I started applying my biological products out into these large industrial farms out in the Midwest, we started seeing year-on-year increases in the germination rates. And what's more interesting is that we saw eliminations or remediation, you might say, of the genome of the plants, where when we replanted a GMO crop and applied the biology, the crop would not show any of the genetic markers of having had their DNA modified by a virus. As is, we have a PCR test that we do to test for the specific genes, the Roundup Ready genes. It's just a little they sell these kits for doing it, right? To test if it's a GMO or if it has this thing or that thing or whatever. And so we would see that literally the biology in the ground that's responsible for making the nutrients available, which, since if Liebig's idea of ionic fertilizer is incorrect, then we have to say, what's the mechanism for uptake by plants, right? So as far as I can tell, if you ever do germination on the seed, the first thing that happens is the seed that starts to exude carbohydrates and sugars out into the ground around it. And in a healthy soil, those microorganisms will take those organic acids and they will break them down into specific, they'll take the sugars, they'll do fermentation or backlit fermentation, and they'll generate organic acids that, depending on the organic acid profile, each specific organic acid has a preference for reacting with or attaching to different types of nutrients, and this allows for the selective extraction of nutrients from the soil by a interface between the seed or the plant and these microorganisms, right? And so it was by this mechanism I was able to actually grow plants in soils that they would say, this is infertile. You can't grow shit. You can't grow anything here. And yet I would see it happening in some cases. And then so I figured out how to induce that effect. But when it comes to the GMO, I mean, they're spraying stuff now that's like literally killing everything. So when you apply Roundup, for instance, Roundup is a broad spectrum micronutrient chelator. And it basically ties up the iron, ties up the manganese, it ties up the copper, the zinc, the cobalt, these elements that are used in small amounts to actually regulate critical functions in the body. Manganese regulates production of the seed, basically sperm. It's essential for numerous functions, but it also is involved in the generation or the genesis of cells, and mobilizing of iron is part of that. So people that are iron deficient and generally are suffering from a manganese deficient due to a manganese deficiency in the food they're eating due to that massive over application of Roundup to all of the soils in the United States. As would be my best guess, as far as what I can understand, what I understand that I see happening in the population, and from the food, I can infer where the different deficiencies are coming from generally. So, because I've done this or seen this, and when we'd be growing these crops, but we'd be feeding them to pigs and chickens and turkeys, and so I kind of already had to work my way through how to fix these problems in populations, large populations of animals. So that's where I'm deriving my assumption, or my diagnosis in relation to this. Did that make sense, or was it just word salad?
No. It's interesting you say that, because when you say manganese, is that the same thing as magnesium?
No, manganese. Magnesium is Mg, manganese is Ma.
Okay.
Manganese is right next to iron on the periodic table, and it's used as a mechanism for basically regenerating iron in the blood. So when you shift between having oxygen and no oxygen, there's these two different states that iron can be in, and manganese is involved in that regeneration cycle.
And is there a food source that gives you that type of supplementation, or is there a supplementation that you can take, since it's so crucial, I guess, to people who might be quote unquote iron deficient?
It's funny that you mentioned that, or you ask. Yeah, so I live currently here in Gilroy, California, on 7 acres of pomegranates. And I could say this, I thought I was infertile my entire life. And I'd never been able to conceive a child with anyone. And I moved to this pomegranate orchard, and my wife and I immediately got pregnant.
Really?
And after she had her first child, she got pregnant immediately again. So, thing is, this is an organic pomegranate orchard that hasn't had anything sprayed on it. It's been here for about 12 years now. So, started eating we both started eating the pomegranates and drinking the juice, and what I learned about it was the seeds seem to have some ability to increase or support the generation of testosterone and estrogen. And manganese is generally found in high concentrations in seeds. It has to be there for the seed to form in the first place. So chronic manganese deficiency has also, a bunch of different issues. It does result in, iron deficiency. And it also results in the inability to generate sperm or, reproduce. And that's one of the things that we noticed. We actually have the farms in the Midwest. We would actually have to switch off of using GMO food, GMO crops. We'd have to switch back to what was known as conventional every few years, or we could not get our animals to reproduce anymore. They wouldn't make any babies. Or the babies would be died. They'd be non-viable.
Yeah.
The mortality and morbidity was so high, it was not profitable. We had to do it. They had to do it. They wouldn't have done it if they didn't have to, because the thing about it is, like, in the Midwest, they hate having to. They love using Roundup, and the reason why is manyfold. But basically, the amount of acres that one group of people, a small group of people, can manage is much larger. It allowed for the expansion of the size of your farm because you don't have to do the weeding, right? So you get to have one tractor go over the ground once, spray it instead of tilling it, and your weeding's done. So before, you'd actually have to have enough tractors to be able to till the ground in an amount of, if you think about the difference in the speed of having to till the soil over to kill the weed, versus just dry over the top of it and spray this liquid in it. Think about the difference in the amount of energy and the amount of time and the amount of wear on your material, your equipment. So what it allowed was one tractor to be able to actually do or prepare and plant a much larger area of ground. And the thing about it is, this was a model that was created and then was then adopted so that Rabobank, where, I think it's so funny. Rabobank is an agricultural bank, but basically you'd be able to get farm insurance if you had a plan for what your production plan, and you're like, well, I'm going to use this GMO seed and this tractor and this and that. You could have this model that you'd be able to get a loan from a bank from. And what's interesting about agriculture is that farmers make about 7% on a dollar. So that means they borrow $100,000 to make $7,000.
It's not funny.
Yeah, it's a gambler, and he came and was talking to the farm boss on one of the colonies of the 6,000 acre farms, and he's like, the farmer told him basically the math on the likelihood of being successful and the profit ratios related to it, and the gambler literally said, I would never take those odds. In fact, the only reason why farmers can actually run a business is crop insurance. Because crop failure happens so often that if it were not for crop insurance paying for them when they fail, there would be zero money in growing America's food.
Well, and the whole other tragic story is, how those family farms have just been, folded for whatever reason. Nowadays, it's not a very profitable industry, and the fact that if your farm is downwind from some Monsanto seed and it gets onto your crops and they come and test it and they see Monsanto stuff downwind, I mean, they're taking farms and emptying silos. It's crazy. The whole commercial food industry is just very, very, very cutthroat industry, I must say. Like you said, they're growing all of our food. Not all of our food. We get our wheat from other food from other places. But yeah, it's a very cutthroat industry, man.
See, what's interesting about wheat, though, a lot of people, you've heard of celiac. Everyone's like, oh, I got an allergy to wheat. I have celiac disease and this and that and the other damn thing. It's not an allergy to wheat, believe it or not. What it is it's an allergy to glyphosate. And you go, well, they don't use Roundup Ready wheat on everything, right? They grow wheat, they'll do a winter wheat, and the way that they plant it, basically everything dies and the wheat comes back first, right? So they don't have to do it. But the thing about it is they use Roundup in the harvesting of wheat, not in the planting, meaning that when it's ready to harvest, they drive over the crop and spray it with Roundup to kill it so that it all dries down. There's an even finish on it so that everything's the same level of dryness so that it makes it easier to basically pack it. So after they harvest the crop, they put it in a silo and they run air through it. They do this what's called a dry down. They dry it down to a specific amount of moisture to try and inhibit mold. And so the Roundup is used in wheat. They spray it literally over the surface of the wheat right before they finish it. And there's no regulation of this for even if you're growing organic wheat. This one farmer told me, Jeff, you know what the difference is between organic you know why organic food costs you so much? And I'm like, why? He's like, it costs more to spray pesticides in the dark.
Spray pesticides in the dark. Wow.
So the thing about it when it comes to wheat, the people that have this think that they have this allergy. What it is actually the glyphosate. Now, glyphosate, the only organism, it's interesting, the gene that they put into the crops that makes it so where they can harvest the wheat, or where the plants can survive, or rather, the application of glyphosate came from an organism known as Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which exudes an extracellular protease called glypase, which basically breaks down the glycine phosphate bond. And so I did these tests. I was having this argument with this chemist over Facebook. One of these guys who was a chemist for Monsanto, and he's like, no, Monsanto. He's like, no, glyphosate's totally safe, and Roundup Ready is totally fine. This and that and the other thing. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not the case. So I decided to do an empirical study in relation to it. I took glyphosate and I put it in, applied it in accordance to the federal law to an area of ground. And I took samples from the area of ground that wasn't treated with it. And, I did an extract, which is that there's these biolog microbial incubation plates, which we use to evaluate the biological community in a soil. And I have 34 different agar wells in triplicate. And so I take an extract of the soil to extract all the cells from it, and then I needle it out, or I plate it out onto this agar, into this agar solution, and then you inject in all the different wells. And each one of the 34 different wells is a different balance of nutrient that specifically identifies the presence of a different type of cellular restoration and can infer the presence of a different organism. So on the side that had been treated with glyphosate, the only well that showed any activity was the putrescine well. And the putrescine well is a well that indicates basically decaying human tissue or mammalian flesh tissue. That was the only well that became active. So literally, what that means is the only organisms that survived in the soil after the application of glyphosate are human pathogens that specifically will attack human tissue. And given the fact that the gene that was installed in the plants allows them to basically exude an enzyme that dissolves human tissue, connective tissue, that makes sense, right? But what doesn't make sense is why are we putting something into our crops that the response to the application of the herbicide is that they exude an enzyme that will literally dissolve our connective tissue. And then people wonder why they have an allergy when they ingest this stuff. Well, it kills off all your microbiome in your gut. It allows you to, do a whole bunch of essential things like, blood clotting, vitamin K, E. coli in your intestine. Yes, no E. coli, no blood clotting. All the precursors for happiness, like for serotonin, they come from bacterium in your guts. Without those organisms, you might need antidepressants, buddy.
Well, and that's what we talk about so much on the show, Joseph. Like, it's not even a puzzle. Like, how many times do we have to get punched in the face we realize we're in a fight? Like, none of this is by accident. Like you just said, like, why are we allowing in our commercial food industry this shit, these chemicals into our food that's doing this to our connective tissue, amongst other things? And again, going back to what I was saying before, and I've said many times, that revolving door of the shit we eat, and then we get into the pharmaceutical industry, and it just continues. We just keep going in that circle. It's absolutely insane. And there's literally no legal recourse. Like, whatever. It's like you said. There's so much money from all these companies, from the pharmaceutical companies, the agricultural, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Agricultural companies, in our politics, all of this, and it's all continuing to keep kicking this can down the road while we're just getting sicker and sicker. And the third leading cause of death in the United States is, a doctor's care, whether it's overprescribed prescriptions, etc. I mean, we're all living these just poisonous lives, and these people who are doing this to us.
Yeah, my father was a fireman paramedic for LA City for 35 years, and he's like, what he called doctors? overpaid professional killers.
Pretty much. I mean, and honestly, I mean, that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what, I mean, again, none of this is hidden. Everything you just enumerated about what is so essential in our food industry, the glyphosate and all of the shit that they're doing to our food, we know what it is and we know what's happening to us. But for some way, there's this huge disconnect from the fact that this is happening and some level of accountability to these companies. It just doesn't fucking happen because we're the crazy conspiracy theorists or whatever, even though the information is right in front of us.
Do you want to know the mechanism by which this has been made possible, from what I can tell? Because the thing about it is I have no education in agriculture. I have no official degree in anything. Here's the thing. That's the only reason why I could be possibly credible in this situation. The reason why is in order to get a degree in any subject or topic, you're going to get a student loan. So you're going to get a doctorate in it or PhD. And by the time you get out, the only people that will be able to afford to pay you a living wage with your cost of your education and the interest on top of it is going to be a company in the industry that literally regulates what is taught in those related universities.
Yeah,
regulates what's taught in those universities by supplying funding. So when you get out, if you go against,
you don't have a career. Yeah, you don't have a career once you get out.
And you can't default on your debt, on a student loan debt. So everybody that has a degree is literally just allowed to talk on it with any sort of an authority, is beholden to the interests that literally regulate their industry.
Absolutely. It's just an assembly line. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Legally, if you're going to speak from a legal perspective, there is absolutely nobody that is a professional in any field in the United States that does not have does not basically rendered to be not credible. We can't really even rely on anything they say because they have a conflict of interest. Their conflict of interest really prevents them from speaking against the industry which they work in.
Cucks of the industry is the best way to put it. You're absolutely right. Their whole livelihood, their whole tenure, their whole, all of their careers is based on perpetuating these lies.
Well, and I've met a lot of good people that have refused to go along with it, and they can't talk against it. That they won't. They play the game as good as they can and try and do what's right. But a lot of people, I can't tell you how many people that I've met that were either nurses or doctors that refuse to be involved in the profession anymore.
Well, and like
these people are the people that
when you're
the brightest individuals.
Yes. Well, like you said, once you get so deep down the rabbit hole and so entrenched into the system, your livelihood is based off your ability to go along, to get along. You can't speak out once you've, like I said, been so entrenched, and then all of a sudden you get, lack of a better term, woke, or you wake up to how, what you've been fed is nonsense. And it's crazy, man. It's all organized crime, it seems like. I'm sorry, but Patrick, you're back with us. He was having some mic issues, and I was gonna, before we let you slide, I was gonna ask a question. But Pat, if you're here, do you want to ask that question when you felt it was so important?
Yeah, no, I think it's super important that we get down to the kind of the brass tacks about the process of getting to the level of molecular restructuring and purification of water that your unit seems to be able to do, and the fact that you not only had to be intelligent enough to think this up to create the device, but then you had to create the devices to do the testing to prove that your theories were actually correct.
Yeah, well, the good thing about I was talking about Euclid, right, and the elements is that it's just science. So once you understand the principles, how everything works, it's application of known principles, and all of the devices that we use for analytical testing are based off of, in some way or another, those same principles. So the one issue that we have with water, of course, is our way that we basically determined the chemical structure of water is we took a high power laser, and we shot it, and we looked at the absorption and emission pattern of it, and we said, okay, basically the light that shot out after we zapped it with the laser, we said, okay, that tells us what it's made out of. But I don't think that that's accurate. I think we missed something actually really, really important. And that's the whole thing with emission. Now, if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, right, you have it has a frequency and it has a wavelength, and the frequency times the wavelength is equal to the speed of light, which is whatever. And you go equals mc squared, but supposedly a photon does not have any mass. So if a photon has no mass, then it doesn't matter what you multiply it by, what velocity you multiply it by, there's no energy in it. And if that were true, that would mean that no solar panel works at all, ever. It can't, because there's no mass to carry the energy to actually initiate the photovoltaic response. So in that sense, either E equal mc squared is wrong, or a wave of light has a mass behind it. But basically, and if that's true, you have to say, well, where's the mass coming from? So if you look at combustion of hydrogen and oxygen, what we call rocket fuel, you have the combustion process where two hydrogen molecules combust, and you have four hydrogen combust with two oxygen molecules, creating 2 moles or two molecules of H2O. And the thing about that is that can't possibly be right, because in chemistry there's this thing called electronegativity, where you have every element has a certain, it's a concept created by Linus Pauling, but every element has a certain amount of force by which it reaches out and tries to grab electrons from other things around it. And for hydrogen and oxygen, they're up at the top of the table with that. But hydrogen's is 2.1, oxygen's is 3.6. And so that means the oxygen's molecules would want to actually, if you had H2O, if it was H2O, the two oxygen molecules would actually grab onto each other and kick the hydrogens off, because they're combined 3.6 plus 3.6, 7.2 electronegativity value gives them enough strength to actually complete their shells together with just two elements, or two oxygen, an oxygen bond, and it's a stronger bond than they would have it. It's just one oxygen to two hydrogen. So there's no way that really the two hydrogen molecules, the H2O could be H2O. If it was H2O, you'd be able to actually light it on fire, but it's not. What I think is happening is during the combustion, where you have hydrogen, and oxygen combusting, that literally a nucleus is shot out from one of the hydrogen molecules, and we end up with a different structure. When I was doing this imaging of water, I saw the what is known as 105.4 degree hydrogen bond that is is basically alluded to by the testing we've done. But the difference was, with the method that I used, I actually saw those two bonds with the hydrogen as interference patterns, which would mean that the two hydrogen molecules were in a kind of what I'm inferring from that is that literally one of the two hydrogen molecules doesn't have a nucleus, but it's actually what is known as a muon. And the H2O is actually, H2O is not water. It's, we have one that's basically the proton or the light comes out of the combustion of hydrogen and oxygen, and that the nucleus that is shot off from that, it's basically like leaves us with kind of something in a state of superposition of being there and not there. And it's interesting because when you want to turn H2O back into, hydrogen and oxygen, you have to pump a massive amount of electricity into it that, from my testing, shows that suspiciously, basically you have to pump enough electrons back into it to create a proton, which would suggest that you're having to replace a proton in the H2O molecules to turn it back to H to and O again.
So I'm sorry, when you say like H2O is not water, is that like all water? Like we get obviously water from different sources, as we talked about earlier. Qualify that a little bit.
well, nobody's ever actually found much H2O whenever they looked for it. It's when they do look for it, find it. What they say is it's hydroxyl atom. It's hydroxyl atom. It's a hydroxyl molecule and a hydrogen atom. So it's and I forget the positives and negatives on it. I've been switching back between electrical engineering and chemistry, so you'll have to forgive me if I get this wrong.
Well, so where did whoever get the whole single hydrogen atom and 2 oxygen? Where did that particularly come from?
I'm sorry, what?
Where did they get the whole notion that water was a single hydrogen atom and 2 oxygen atoms to create H2O? Like,
that's by firing a bunch of protons at it. An X-ray spectrometry, like literally they cook off the electrons and they create a stream of protons. They fire it at water and they use it to fire it at a water molecule, and they use that to image the hydrogen-oxygen bond. Yeah. So literally, I'm saying the water molecule was missing a proton when it was formed, and you imaged it by shooting a bunch of protons at it. Maybe you just replaced the proton in it, and that's what you're seeing.
Yeah, Pat, you're right. My mind's blown.
So let's get to the unit, because I really think we want people to understand, the pressure of the water going through it. There's no power to the unit. All these things. What comes out the other side? It's so important. The 6-pointed molecular structure of it, the halo of light around it, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the techniques that has been called pseudoscience that I do not think is pseudoscience is, have you heard of like people doing, taking pictures of auras, or it's Carillion photography? That's what it's called. And
Sure.
This device called the GDV, or gas discharge analyzer, was created by a doctor. I think it was created by, I may be wrong on this, but Dr. Krishna Madhapad. And he did a bunch of research on, originally I think it was fluid from bodies, like fluid like blood or whatever. So when you look at the blood, he would shoot light at it, really just flash it with high intensity light, and then he would take a picture of it like millionths of a second afterwards. And what he would see is that there was a variance in the size of this ring of light that would be created effectively by the charge of the central nucleus being attracted to the light. Basically, it would grab it and would pull it into like a circular pattern, cause it to orbit around the elements or around the molecule of blood for just a little small, short amount of time, right? And he said, okay, well then what he was inferring or stating was that the healthier the cell was, the more light that it would actually be able to capture and would be captured and would be going around it. And so people started applying this technique to water as well. And so that technique, one of the first things that I did when I designed the unit that I'm using now, which I didn't get to the whole thing where when I initially did the testing, the farmer that I did the test of the field on, he ordered 4 more devices. Well, only one of those additional 4 units that we ordered actually even worked. And so I tried to get a replacement. I wanted to talk to the guy that was behind this because I didn't know what the hell was going on with this. I'm like, this device shouldn't work, and it does. I don't know what's going on here. I need to figure this out. I was really annoyed because everything that I knew had been thrown out the window by this single test. Well, when I tried to talk to the scientist behind it, I drove out to Arizona to meet with him, and he refused to meet with me, or he didn't take my call. He knew I was coming, and I did this test that actually verified the function of his unit, but then he wouldn't meet with me. And then I started listening to some of the talks that he'd given, and I'm like, this guy's a pseudoscience, and he knows absolutely nothing about, actually knows really nothing about science or, chemistry or physics from what I can tell. And he's talking to a bunch of people that are really into spirituality and this and that, the other thing. I'm like, this guy's selling a religion, not a product. And just strangely enough, while I was there waiting to meet with the guy, and he wasn't taking my calls, this woman walked up to me and she's like, "You're not from here, are you?" I'm like, "No." And she's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I'm here to meet with this guy, blah, blah, blah." And she's like, "Oh, don't meet with him. He's a con artist. He stole the technology from my friend, Rob Sandell." And I'm like, "You're kidding." I'm like, "Can I meet with this guy?" And she said, yeah. So she set up a meeting with him that afternoon. I drove out to Cottonwood, Arizona, and met with him. I got to see all of the prototypes that were leading up to the device that he eventually made. And he had an explanation for it that I didn't really believe it or get or understand. And I'm like, that's kind of bullshit. He said it was all just a bunch of frequencies. And I'm like, okay, I'm dealing with this. I'm dealing with in that case. The thing about it was he was right, but he didn't know why he was right. But based upon what I learned from him or inferred from it, I didn't quite get it, what was going on with how to make the unit. But based upon what he told me, I'm like, well, what he's saying is in any way correct from the way parts of it that I agree with, then it would be better if we built the unit like I came up with a different design for it. And the different design, when we tested it on the GDP, had a 10 times increase in the volume of light that it would actually pick up in the GDP. And I was like, oh, well, I guess this is better. And the problem that I had is I had no really way of actually quantifying the effect that we're having other than techniques that weren't really used. I could see the effect in populations of animals or in plants over time, but we didn't have a mechanism by which we could define this is causing this, which is causing that. And I'm like, even though people were pushing or started a group of people with initial people that came out to do the testing, when they did the testing in the strawberry field, started manufacturing my design and or trying to, and a bunch of people copied them, and a bunch of people copied them. And it got to the point where there's a bunch of these water units out everywhere, and none of them actually worked because none of them actually copied the correct design. And I've gone back and tested them, and they don't work. They aren't doing what they're supposed to. And I mean, I know why. It's because the people that were building them didn't understand the physics behind their operation and how they had to be manufactured to generate that effect. They thought, I can just drop a bunch of crystal balls in a tube and it will work. It's like, it'll do something, but it's not stable. So one of the things that I was doing, developed this technique, which I call it's a Johnson spectrometry, and it's based off of what is known as a Zahn cup. It's created by this, chemist / physicist. I think it was specifically he studied fluid dynamics, and it's used to measure the viscosity of a solution. It's this cup, and you pour water into it, and the cup has a hole of a specific size, and you measure the rate of flow, the amount of time that it takes for that water to drop or drain out of the cup, and you measure how much water is left in the hole based on its size of the hole. Is only going to allow so much water to drain out. If it gets to the point where literally the attraction of the liquid to the sidewalls can't overcome the resistance of being forced through that hole, then it will stop at that point. And then you have a way of inferring the difference between the force of gravity trying to push it down, and the attraction or the attraction of that solution to the sidewalls and itself as a resistance. And then you can make inferences as to what is known as the adhesion, which is a liquid's attraction to something else, and the adhesion, which is its attraction to itself. And so what I did was I used this cup to create effectively a lens out of liquid, so as to properly describe the bonding angles and attraction between them. And so then by shooting different types of light through, I can actually make several different determinations, but it's actually able to image the hydrogen-oxygen bond. But the hydrogen appears as an interference pattern, which means that there's this oscillation that's happening between those positions where the hydrogen's supposed to be, which is I'm taking as to mean that one of them isn't a hydrogen molecule. But that's a lengthy explanation, so I'll stay away from that. But the 105.4 degree bond angle has some interesting properties. One of the tests that I did, I was shooting light through this lens made out of water, effectively, and I was comparing the structured versus the unstructured water. And I got a diffraction grating when I shoot pure light through, like white light through, that creates the three primary colors. So I got red, green, and blue. The structured water created, instead of 3 circles of red, green, and blue, created a tetrahedron made out of a bluish white light. And I just about fell over.
And I don't know if you
Actually,
just
how
said
the
this.
video-
Does the type of light matter? I think you said it was white light, but if it was like infrared light or another light spectrum, does that change the subsequent effect on? Does the type of light have any bearing on anything?
Yeah, the frequency of the light. So light, water is a polar molecule, and light can be polar, or it can be nonpolar. So it's the spin of the light effectively determines what kind of image is going to be spit out on the other end, whether it has a spin in one direction or the other, or both directions. And it literally affects the way that the light image, the way that the light is moving affects its interaction with the liquid lens, and thus the image that's spit out on the other side. And that's why this is useful. I can use different frequencies of light with different polarities to actually image different aspects of that water, to actually determine different things from it. So that's why this is useful. So if I use the full spectrum, all the different frequencies of light, right, then there's going to be a whole bunch of those frequencies are going to go through that water molecule, and they're going to interact with all the bonds in it, and it's going to spit out something that's different through the interference between the wavelengths hitting each other. It'll spit out a different pattern than if I have a singular frequency of light traveling through at a specific wavelength, right? Then it will only image things that are in a resonance or with that resonance with where that oscillation of frequency that is in the light is actually in resonance with the molecule. It will hit it and it will bounce off. If it's not in resonance with the molecule, then it will pass through, right? It won't interfere with it. So you have to have a corresponding resonance of either some harmonic of that, some harmonic of the gap between the hydrogen and the oxygen molecule to have any sort of interaction. That's why some frequencies can travel through some things and can't travel through other things, or it can be amplified or can be reflected by different substances. It has to do with the specific frequency that's being generated and how that interacts with the barriers of that physical structure. It's just like, if you can think of it like you have a chain link fence and I have a golf ball, I can throw that thing straight through. If I have a basketball, it's going to bounce off. It's basically the same thing.
Well, and when you talk about frequency and its effect on physical structure, I've always found super fascinating. Like when I watch the cymatic videos, these particles placed on whatever kind of platform, and then you hit it with a certain frequency, and it creates these geometrical patterns. It's absolutely insane.
Oh yeah, I have some things I should show you. One of the things I designed that I thought was awesome. I actually learned this from microorganisms. I built this device that was, there's a lot to it, but I'll just stay simple with it. But it's like kind of like those somatic devices that other people use, but it was modeled after what is known as the nitrogenase enzyme. The nitrogenase enzyme is what's used to split charged atmospheric gases into individual nitrogen molecules, which is then used to code human DNA. It's the beginning of the process of generation of the program for life, is that enzyme that does that. So I created a speaker based upon that design to be able to actually break chemical bonds using sound and process raw minerals into highly valuable, soluble states. So I could take mine minerals, not have to use chemical processes, but instead actually use sound to break apart the chemical bonds and move it into a solution. And thus I wouldn't be adding anything to it. Thus I wouldn't be, it would be allowed to be sold as an organic fertilizer, right? So that was the reasoning behind it. But what I learned how to do with the device is actually pump water with it. So I'm able to literally create, if you look at sound itself, it has a positive pressure wave and a negative pressure wave. So you have an area where it's creating a void. So there's some systems for mathematics where you can actually use multiple waves of different frequencies to actually create complete structures or defined structures. So using those formulas, I was able to actually create effectively a pump that was made out of positive and negative pressure waves that would extend through the whole length of a pipe and pump water all the way through it, which is where I got my idea for how water or the heart actually works. there's more. So anyways, never mind. But it is fascinating. I can send you some videos that I was able to, I'm a proficient with the concept and the idea enough to where I can use it to circulate water in either direction inside of a cup, or inside of a tank or whatever, and just using resonant sound frequencies. And it's actually very, very efficient. I've seen people have motors and propellers. Well, but if you don't have to have a prop at all, that would be the ideal situation. So it's one of the things I'd like to work on after I get done launching putting the water structuring devices I'm building. Once I put them out, and again, I actually dedicated myself to actually building these units because of the number of people that copied the technology and produced devices that didn't work. And I started looking online and seeing these different credible scientists actually debunking what these pseudoscientists that were selling copies of my units were saying. And I'm like, you know what? I'm tired. I'm like, people are literally getting ripped off by a copy of something that I made that did work, and the entire science is being completely discredited. I put a lot of work into figuring this out, and I set out with a goal of actually disproving it. I built the devices to be like, well, if this is true, then if this isn't true, then if I do this, this won't work. And if it does, then I guess it's right. But it ended up working. So I've always gone from at science and testing as I'm trying to disprove what I think may be happening. So when I think something might be happening, I go, well, how can I prove that isn't the case?
Well, and that is the essence of the scientific method, is it not?
Well, it's not the way people do science anymore. Now science has the way you do science is you say, give me a bunch of money and I will go ahead and say whatever will be most profitable for your company. And because I'm a scientist, you can't question me.
Which then becomes the real pseudoscience, quite frankly, because it's all, like you said.
Well, it's like, this is the thing. I got into studying science because I wanted to understand things. I really was raised by evangelical Christians, I guess you could say, and I could not accept the concept of just believe this. I'm like, no, I don't want to operate off belief. I like the concept of being a Gnostic, which means I work off what I know and I can prove and I can sense and I can determine to be true. To me, it's like if there is a God, then all of the laws of nature are his language and his rules, and those are the rules that exist. That's the truth. That is the fact. That is the truth. And so for me, science is my religion, but in a different way, not in a way to where people say, well, I believe this and I will not challenge it, but rather the challenging of things and determination of truth is the mechanism by which, you express, I practice, you could say I could practice my religion, which would be, I'd say if I have a religion, it's truth, and understanding this world. That's what I believe in doing. If I believe in doing anything. It's like figuring out what's going on would probably be the first thing anybody should be doing in any situation. And I still feel like I'm working on step one of that. But finally, I feel like I have a basis on which I can move forward on, given what I understand now about what's happening with water. I feel like I finally learned. It wasn't until I was 40 years old, I learned the first thing that I actually could know to be true. And so I feel like I have a basis to work off of now. But it took me that long just to get to a point where I could feel like I had a proper reference, a frame of reference to even begin to be able to study anything. So anyways,
I'd
like to get to a couple of points when it comes to human health and plants. And I'll go ahead and send you, after we're done, I'll send you all the data that I collected in relation to this. One, the structured water actually donates energy current to your cells. The unstructured water takes energy away from your cells. So I did this by putting basically using a multimeter to determine the charge flow between my hand holding one probe and putting the other probe into the water. So one of these donates charge, the other one takes it away, and the difference is around just a bit over 60 millivolts. But when you multiply that 60 millivolts by the trillions of cells in your body, it becomes quite significant.
And do you test for wattage on your device as well? It's not plugged into anything. And what have you found in terms of wattage or voltage that it's producing when you test it?
So I've done different testing, and I've used different testing methods. So I've used the contact-free testing method, where you have a device that you point at the device, and it measures basically bending in the magnetic fields. And I'll send you the video on it, and you tell me what you see, what you think. But it was like, over like I think it was like about 240 volts on the house unit, and yeah, it's significant. So that one determines the voltage, which is basically the system pressure, but it doesn't necessarily determine the wattage. So you have to make an inference onto what that would be. When I use a oscilloscope to test the 3/4 inch it's a 1 inch unit. It's a 1 inch body with a 3/4 inch flow through, or half inch the flow through. I measured upwards of 383 volts at a baseline of 60 psi with a 3/8 inch feed hose. So you can extrapolate what that would be.
Yeah, and then when you say, for instance, test the skin surface of someone who has not been drinking this water out of your device, and then test them, afterward, what is the difference there per square inch or whatever, however you measure that?
So I'd do the test by placing the probes a centimeter approximately apart from each other on the surface of the skin. And the difference that I was able to read on both my wife and I, which I've never seen anyone else like this, but was like we're literally have over 1 million ohms of resistance in our skin surface. The standard ohmic resistance of an individual is between 3 and 10,000, depending on how much sweat or moisture they have, and the concentration of charge carriers or sweat or salts in their sweat. But 3 to 10,000 is the generally accepted levels that we measure.
Yeah, and what do you see in yield wise with crops with your device, say for instance?
There's so much to yield that there is to understand, which is the genetics, the location on the planet, the location of the plant genetics. Its history, its recent history, as far as where the experiences its parents had, literally, the type of soil it's planted in versus the time it was cultivated in, the altitude, the start of the angle of light, the latitude and longitude on the planet, because it's literally, you can think of the leaves are angled of different plants are angled at in different directions, right? And those are going to, depending on where your longitude and latitude is on the planet, have a varying proper orientation to the sun. You can think of, and
going back to that sacred geometry.
And the sun, throughout the season, the concentrations of different wavelengths changes as well. So there's a lot to it. So I could say that what I've seen, what I will say that I can say very confidently, is that I've seen an increase in the overall health of whatever crop it is I'm growing. Because literally what constitutes improvement, if I'm saying that I have a product that is going to actually help everyone everywhere, then it actually has to actually have a different function everywhere. And so explaining why that is possible is kind of really the thing that I'd like to, it's a $1 million question. I've seen one of the tests we did in Canada was in a hog barn, and their goal was to get to market earlier with a lower feed conversion, have a higher weight, no antibiotics, and no mortality, morbidity. They wanted get the highest grade meat without any, mortality is basically the animal dies. Morbidity means that the animal's so sick, or the other issues with its overall health makes it unsuitable for slaughter. And you can't really use it as meat. It's just not worth processing. And so with that system, we literally tripled the profits from that farm on hogs.
Wow.
On an annual basis.
Sounds like
Upwards,
you
the highest results I've seen from a crop was from rhubarb, where we got a 7 times increase in production per acre, average over, I think there's about 30 acres. And we had a 6 time increase in actual nutrient density, which would be the bricks content, which I talked about in the beginning, how I did the initial measurement of the bricks or the sugars and the strawberries. So when I do testing and I give test results, I don't go out to sell the units. What I do is I'll interact with the farmer and I'll say, well, I'm having this problem or this and that, and I'll extrapolate if I think the device if I think I know of a way that I can help them, I'll say, well, I think this may work. And then I will do a test. And if the test works, then they buy the technology from me or they, whatever.
Right.
So this has always been the way that I conducted or collected data. I don't ever really want to be involved in the collection of results when it comes to something I have a financial interest in it. So I'll only ever do those sorts of interactions as doing a test initially, because originally I didn't really know exactly how my device was working, what benefit it was creating, or how to even know what to price it at, what it would be, whether or not it would be worth the person paying the money for the device and installing it on their field and then using it, whether the money they would pay me for that would actually ever be able to be recovered. And until I could actually do that, couldn't really be like, oh, hey, here's something that might help you, might not, but give me some money. That's just not I don't think that's ethical. I don't think it's appropriate.
Well, it sounds like you're working with some game-changing stuff,
So,
Joseph. Without a shadow of a
I've
doubt.
been working to collect data and just trying to get to the point where I'm certain as to what the device even does, how it does it, and be able to prove that before I felt like I could really launch the product into the market. Because everything that I've ever sold in the market, I do a value added proposition, which is you give me X amount of dollars, and if you give me X amount of dollars for this product and you use it, then you are increasing the profitability of your business by Y. And if you can't do that, then you're a con artist, in my opinion. Right?
Well, you're up against a tough business with the ag business, or not just the ag business, but yeah, it sounds like you're on to some game-changing stuff. Patrick has joined us up. I feel like we've kept you for so long, and hopefully it's not an inconvenience, man. This has been seriously, Pat. You are correct. This has been mind-blowing stuff, man. On such a simple substance as water, so fascinating.
Well, it's I don't know, simple and sophisticated are two different things. It's not that what water is really defined by the things it interacts with. And you look at the table of the elements and all the things that it can draw into solution. It has to be able to change its structure to be able to cause all those things to interface with each other. So thinking it has one structure, in my opinion, is absurd. How could you possibly draw that conclusion based on what we all know? All the things we know can draw into solution.
Well,
ridiculous.
And the fact that you ask questions constantly and question your own beliefs constantly is something that I've believed in for a long time, to end up coming to conclusions or down the right path, or the path of complete contrary beliefs to the mainstream, no matter what the subject matter is. And in terms of your intelligence level, quantum physics, astrophysics, physics, and everything else that you're doing, and your level of understanding, I mean, most people can't comprehend, because once they get that PhD, that doctorate, the degree in agronomy or whatever it is, they many times just kind of come to the conclusion that they've learned everything there is to learn, besides a little bit of continuing education on a new pharmacy product or whatever it is, right?
Well, again, I addressed this at the beginning. It's the problem with, it's not their fault. We all got screwed. And I feel bad for everyone that got a degree and paid money for an education for the current system, because it taught them to memorize things, not how to learn, not how to understand. They
Right.
know all these facts, but they weren't trained in how to actually apply knowledge well. So it's only 10% of the population has both a left and right brain, and only those individuals will actually be able to benefit from our educational system as it is. The rest of them have been robbed. Because if you're one of the people that primarily can just memorize things but can't apply that information in a diverse and changing environment, then you spend a bunch of time memorizing information, and then you're put in a situation where you're supposed to apply it when that's not your capacity. I mean, they screwed you over. They set you down a life path of failure from the beginning.
And I think explain again, because you've shown people how to put this device together, and if they're not both right and left brain capable, that they'll put it together and it'll come apart when you try to run water through.
It won't work. The thing is like people generally have different ways of seeing things. The right brain people and the left brain people, they have different way that they interact with problems, and they have different perspectives or ways of seeing the same thing, kind of like the three blind men and the elephant analogy. And so because of that, they will see the parts of it they will see, and they will organize or build a copy of what they can see, but they can't build a copy of the things that they don't see. And I'm 3 times as blind as any other individual, and that's why I know that the elephant is even bigger than I can tell you it is. Or we thought. It's a bigger elephant than we thought. It's got legs, it's got a huge side wall on one side, and it's got this trunk. And depending on the position that I'm reaching for it at, it's a completely different thing. And I don't think anyone's ever seen the whole side of the elephant. And that's the elephant in the room in physics and science. It's like
yeah, it's got to be frustrating when you have conversations.
Actually, I love having conversations, especially generally. I mean, if I'm interacting with somebody that's intellectually honest, they'll normally go, "Where the hell did you get your education? How did you learn all this? My freaking God!" And it's normally really edifying and beneficial, because I enjoy testing my own perspectives, and I'm challenging them and trying to discount them. I think that's fun. I'm in an argument with myself. It's like since I was a kid, they taught me, believe in Santa Claus, believe in Easter Bunny, believe me in this and this and this. And I figure the process of becoming an adult is throwing all the beliefs out and actually finding out what's true. And that's the process of growth as an individual. And I enjoy that very, very much so. What else is there to do? You can rot and decay, or you can challenge yourself and you can get stronger. And I feel like that's a fulfilling philosophy or life path for me.
Well, like I say, the level of education that you have, self-education and knowledge that you have, and the way your mind works, but here we are dealing with the general public that won't even look up and acknowledge, chemtrails.
Well, I think a lot of people have a heart, or how much stuff can people even really deal with on a day-to-day basis? We all have so much going on in our own lives that
sure.
A lot of people we have this thing. If you look at even the way the human brain works, there's a massive amount of sensory information that's coming into your body right now. And your brain filters out between what it considers to be relevant and what it considers to be irrelevant. And it literally erases everything it considers to be irrelevant, to the point where you can't even really see the things in your life and in your world that you haven't even recognized as being relevant. They can be there your entire life and you wouldn't even notice them. That's the capacity for human, but we have to function that way, because otherwise we'd be overloaded with information. That's one of the things that I think has been the most disempowering thing for the population in general, is the overload of information. Nobody knows what to believe. And they go, what should I believe? And my answer is nothing at all. If you cannot deduce the truth of it based upon what you know to be real, what you can sense, then I didn't know if you were signing up for religion, but what you might want to figure out who the preacher is and what their goals are for that, for that church, because knowing when to pass in the Kool-Aid is going to be essential at some point.
A lot of Joel Osteen's in science.
Well, it seems to be all that science is used for, is to sell people on a product, and the people that are marketing these products are in control of their distribution and paying for their people looking at them or whatever. The people generally doing this that are the business people, they're only looking at getting money. They aren't concerned whatsoever with any benefit it might have to society. And as a side effect, they ended up having spent a whole lot of money in marketing. Now, me personally, when I started, I was surprised when I started manufacturing these devices because I spent no money in marketing, got swamped very quickly, where I could not produce enough units. And so I was, it was interesting because one of the people, the reason why basically at the end of 2020, a guy that had been selling units for a decade, he's like, I'm not even sure if anything is these units work at all. Like I was talking, so my friend, Dr. Michelle Veneziano, who's an osteopath up in Northern California. She called me up one day and she's like, Joseph, I have this guy that I want you to talk to. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, he's been selling these water restructuring devices. And I told him that you're the person to talk to about it. The guy had been selling units for 10 years that didn't work. And he's like, I can't even be certain. So he brought me up to meet his father-in-law, and who's also a medical doctor, and he's the kind of person that doesn't believe in anything. And he's like, I haven't been able to get this guy to believe in structured water in 10 years. And I'm like, that's because, well, he's probably right. So we took one of the units that he'd been selling, and I ran water through it. And he's like, okay. I'm like, can you tell any difference? He's like, and then I put one of the units that I built, ran the water through it, and he's like, that water, it's incredible. It feels soft. And I'm like, taste it. He's like, it tastes sweet. I'm like, yeah. If you cannot feel and sense or see the differences in the effects of the water unit that you're running it through, then what does it matter? And that's the thing is that so many people have been sold on the marketing. They didn't even bother to test to see whether or not they could even tell any difference when they applied the quote unquote technology. And they're told, well, we got this test from this university, or this person over here says that, and this person over there says that. I'm like, well, who cares? Screw the experts. What do you experience? Is it helping you? Then who cares what laboratory data you have? It doesn't matter. It's not going to help you in a practical and real sense. And if you can't tell the difference, why would you spend money on it?
Right.
And my thing is you shouldn't.
So what I think we're going to do, Joseph, is, once I get my hands on a unit, obviously we're going to be doing a lot of experiments with it, and not only on the farm but also in our bodies, and really pay attention and chart kind of everything that happens and goes on, and mixing it with powerful organic substances that we've got to not only help ourselves physically but also the organics to grow massive gardens and watch it all happen.
So yeah, the thing is, I had made an agreement with that individual. He ended up being the kind of person that could sell something for 10 years that didn't work and not have too much of an issue with it. So we parted ways. But what the original agreement I had with him, I'd start manufacturing devices for him to sell, and he would start disseminating the science of how to test the function of units to actually see what it was that I had done, like the proof in the pudding. Here's how you test to find out if water units work. Here's how you determine or test for different properties that a bunch of different people are claiming their devices have. I'm like, everybody has claims that they have, and they might use a university or this person or that person to say this, but very few people actually. I haven't seen anyone actually provide real data with contact information to prove that where it's like anything other than them saying that this happened. So my goal has been is to literally provide people the tools and the information they need to understand how to test for different properties, because it's not that hard. It's not hard to understand. It's actually very, very simple. It's as simple as, you ever seen one of those toys where you have those boxes with the different shapes in it and you drop the shape into the box? Does it match? Does it not? If you can do that, you can understand everything I have to say about water and its structure. It's just you have to break it down to a simple level and stop thinking about it as something complex or whatever. So later this week, I'm actually going to be doing a podcast or video podcast with an individual, and I'm going to be sharing or demonstrating some of the testing methods that I use to determine the effect of water structuring devices. And my goal has been to educate the population on how to know for certain, how to find out for themselves, how to not trust, you don't have to trust anybody else. Here's how you do it, and to empower people to do that. And yeah, because that was my goal with this whole project. So
Beautiful.
I'm done talking at this point, so I'm sorry.
No, thank you. And so what, obviously we're planning on getting these devices into a lot of people's hands, a lot of people in agriculture, let them test them out and find out for themselves how these units work. I mean, proof's in the pudding, and we know from a lot of the conversations that I've had with other folks that through frequency, I've heard you, I've been on calls with you talking to, experts in agriculture, and they understand and they're tracking what you're saying, and they realize that you're certainly on to something very big here. So we're excited. And what we're going to do is, after we test this device and we get some results happening, we're certainly going to have you back on, and we're going to talk about those provable results and go from there, brother. So if there's anything else you'd like to say as far as how people can contact you or a website or anything like that before we close up, please do.
Well, I'm not really, if somebody has, I think I'm going to be setting up a mechanism for contacting, I guess you could contact anybody, the host of the show, and if you wanted to, in relation to contacting me, I don't have a lot of time, but if you would like, if you have a question that you want answered, then I'd be more than happy to answer any question, or if you want it.
And I'd be glad to
talk about it. I just need to schedule that time into, I need to make time for that. I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone about it, though, especially if you don't believe it or you disagree with it, or any question that you have in relation to it. I really do want people to understand this. There's more that I would say, and I have to say about the structure of water and the tests that I've done, and the significance of what those tests indicate. I mean, are actually really incredible.
Right.
I'd like to get that information out there. And I want people to understand it, because if I can finish up one statement, and I went off onto agriculture way too long. I should have been staying focused on water.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I'm generally loquacious and tend to go off on tangents. So I apologize for that.
No stress.
But the tech tests that I've done, that I'm showing people how to reproduce, they indicate, again, this water donates energy to your cells. The water has a greater ability to hydrate complex mineral tissues, like causing swelling and bentonite. It changes the crystalline structure. One of the other methods I was able to determine the change in the structure of the water is the way that it would deposit elements as that water dried out. So if the crystal structure of what dries out is different, it's because the solvent is holding it in solution at different angles, right? That's how we're getting the difference in what they call a removal of lime scale, to say people, oh, it's a water softener. It's not a softener in the sense of the general softeners, which have work off an ion exchange mechanism, pulling out the hard elements and replacing them with something that's highly soluble. What it does instead is it actually just increases the solubility, or what would be known as autoionization constant of the water in reference to specific elements, which a change in the bond angle would be necessary. But one of the things that people, I thought, is most critical in relation to this is the change on the bond angle. And when I talked about the diffraction grading, the light splitting into the different primary colors, it's also generating ionizing radiation when it splits into that. So like the rainbow, literally the rainbow that's created in the sky is telling us that literally it's generating ionizing radiation. So every droplet of water, you can think of it as a magnifying glass in the air that concentrates sunlight and creates little laser beams that blast holes in your DNA. And this is part of the reasoning, I believe, for this is what I was thinking about in relation to this. I had a thought is a long time. All the different ancient cultures have a great delusion story, like the story of this firmament that was existed around the earth and how it dropped down to the earth. And that before that time, people lived for a very long time. And they had very advanced societies because people lived long enough to learn things, like learn a lot of stuff. And that would explain how maybe some of the ancient structures were built, because we had people that lived hundreds and hundreds of years. They figured out how to do things that are far beyond our ability to comprehend now, simply because none of us have had enough length of life or lived long enough to be able to gain an understanding with a wide enough breadth to really understand this physical world that we live in. But it seems that was a fact, that people did live that long, and this is verified by records in multiple countries. The Chinese have an amazing history that they've actually have going back much further than our Western culture, and they can verify these things as well. But
and not to mention
the firmament around the sky, we did have a layer of structured water around the sky that wasn't in this 105.4 degree angle that refracts it and effectively creates a lensing effect and ionizing radiation. Then our atmosphere itself would have had far fewer free radicals in it, and then the die-off of our cells or the shortening of our telomeres as a result, we would have lived longer. And that makes sense to me, a lot of sense. So I think that that was one of the more significant things I realized about this, is that when I did the experiment that shows that the light that was coming through, I was testing it, and it showed that if I shoot the light through the structured water, the amount of energy that's absorbed by that water is much, much greater, like over 2.5 times greater. So that's, if you can think about the water in the plant that's absorbing light from the sun, right? The light goes through that water and it collects that energy and it transfers it to the photovoltaic mechanism, the photocells, effectively the photosystem, right? And there's a bunch of different types of effectively chlorophyll or photosystems that are designed to absorb electromagnetic energy from water. But if you look at them, they only have one little active site. And you go, well, how's that able to collect a wavelength of light? It's because that photosystem is interfacing with a bunch of liquid. And it's that liquid that is in the leaf that effectively is acting as a lens to direct that light into that chlorophyll molecule, right? And so when you talk about having a different bond angle and the light being the water that's acting as the collector for the photosystem having a greater absorption capacity, you're talking about the plants being able to absorb or get more energy out of that, out of the same wavelength of light. And what you're talking about is this explains the increase in growth that I've seen. And this is a good metric for me because it's a causative metric, meaning I can determine the increase in light absorption by the water and the increased transference to the chlorophyll. This is what you call science, where you can explain what's happening and why it's happening. You can say, well, we changed this by this mechanism and got this result, and it all pencils out. And that's one thing that I really like, especially when people talk about 5G technology and being worried about EMF, which there is a lot of credible data for that. And understanding that structured water has ability to, instead of forming lenses that increase the damage of the ionizing radiation, actually completely neutralize it, absorb it, and turn it into a form where it's donated to our cellular function. And that's what I've been able to, through a series of different tests, been able to actually show is likely what's happening with it. I did see some incredible results, but I'm going, again, I didn't perform the test. I'm going, how is it even possible these people are getting some of these results? I didn't even believe it. I'm like, they're pulling my leg or something. And I'm like, if it was possible, then what is the mechanism it's operating by? And based upon the testing and the results of the tests that I've done, which I want to teach other people so they can verify or confirm, or if I'm missing something or made a mistake somewhere, I want to know. I want to learn more, but it can be pointed out. Based on the tests that I have seen, the results of massive increase in plant growth and the elimination of the need for antibiotics in a hog barn. Now, can you imagine not needing antibiotics when you live your entire life in your own filth? That's an accomplishment.
That's what we're talking about. So So
And-
what we're definitely gonna have to do, Joseph, is we are definitely gonna have to do a part 2 after I get this device going and we've got water pouring all over the property and we watch this thing turn into
Okay.
literally the Garden of Eden. So we'll have you
I
back
can
in
go ahead.
probably a couple months, and we're gonna tear this up. And until then, Joseph Johnson, all I can say is you've certainly melted my brain again, and I'm sure Jeff's feeling that. And what we're gonna do is let our listeners try to keep up remotely with with a lot of the information that you have put out there, because you got to remember you're talking to mere humans, bro. So we're gonna and I'm gonna continue to learn from you and understand this and be able to, as a caveman that I am, be able to speak it, explain it in caveman terms. And we will continue to educate people and get this device into farmers' hands and the general public, so that they can feel the health benefits and see the benefits for their gardens and their crops.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds good.
Right?
If you'd like to do a small or a quicker follow-up in the near future, I'd love to do a small a video where I show the different testing methods that people can do at home and use to actually see the effects that I'm talking about.
There we go. That's going to be a
One thing that I
VIP
can
show.
talk in millions of words. Let me just show you. It'll be way easier that way.
Yeah,
can
and
see
that'll
the
be-
effects.
Yeah, we can make that a VIP show for the people that have ordered these devices that you have. You've got a couple different versions of them, and then once they get them, and then they can test them themselves and follow along. That'll be a VIP show that people can jump on with us for the just like I said, the crowd that ordered them. So that's I think the way to go.
This is the third time he's
Right,
talking about this show.
Yeah, whatever you guys want to do it. I would like to just show you most interested in. I can show it to you or have you understand it so you can disseminate the information to other people. But also having a video out there where people, again, I've seen all of these different structured water units out there claiming to do this, claiming to do that, and no testing, no data. And if people want to test it, the mechanisms to test are hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I'm like, we don't need that. Here's how you can tell. There's simple ways to do it. I want to empower people. I want to stop people from getting ripped off by this anymore from this. It's one, I don't want people to get ripped off. Two, I want people to recognize what we can talk. If we understand what's going on with this understanding changes everything about our relation to cellular biology, to life itself. This is one of the most critical things in life that we have. This is water. It's most essential to life, and these differences that I've noticed, I've been able to actually prove and show, indicate a tremendous amount of potential for us as a race.
Well, you have heard it straight from the horse's mouth. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but we are running dead on time.
Go.
Joseph, thank you so very much. I am looking forward for part 2, man. Everyone sit out there and digest this. If you guys have any questions, comments, everything, check us out on the Conspiracy on Twitter, Conspiracy Farm 1. Slide in those DMs. Let us know what you think, and check out our store, tcf-store.com. For the champ, for myself, peace and so much love.